Welcome back. You're still tuned in to Salam Media with myself, Salalo Makwidiri. And as I mentioned before we went to the break, we'll be having a very, very interesting conversation with Ashraf Patel. He's a research associate at IGD. And we'll be essentially speaking about the impact of the new government of national unity on South Africa's international relations and development. I think, as the dust begins to settle on the results of the elections, it is clear that the political landscape in South Africa is going to be changing drastically. South Africa's national ANC is coming to terms with the vote of no confidence in the government given by the electorate for the first time since 1994. And this essentially means that they won't be running the country alone, as it has been the case since the dawn of democracy. And as much as that will be affecting South Africans here at home, there's also going to be an impact going forward, particularly on international relations, knowing and understanding just how involved South Africa is, in the international sphere, whether it be BRICS, whether it be, the ICJ, a very, very important role we're also playing here in Africa. We're also in the G20, which I think we'll be chairing next year, if I'm not mistaken. And all of those things essentially are going to be, looked at with a microscope, considering that, you have the Democratic Alliance and the IFP and numerous other parties which will now essentially be in government. They are the government of the day. It's no longer an ANC, ran, sole machine. It is now other various political parties that are involved and that might have different ideologies and approach on how we get involved in issues of international relations. And we are joined by research associate at IGD Ashraf Patel, who will be essentially breaking it down for us. Good morning, Ashraf. Jazakallah so much for joining us and welcome to Salam Media.
Good morning, hello, Salam, and good morning to all listeners. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. A very, very important day for South Africa. Well, today, it has been a very, very, busy couple of weeks since the elections. But President Cyril Ramaphosa has been elected, with the support of what many might consider traditional rivals, particularly, the Democratic Alliance. How do you think this new political alignment will impact South Africa's approach on international relations on a broader scale before we get to specifics?
Yes, a very, very good question. Look, a lot of the policy analysts are rightly calling it continuity with some nuance, meaning that as a kind of party in the national government with 42%, the ANC is not necessarily in a driving position to drive policy. And therefore, a lot of its kind of policy agenda would be somewhat diluted. When it comes to international relations and development cooperation, it is a very complex and competitive global order. And with that in mind, South Africa's major priorities, domestic priorities being kind of trade, employment creation, meeting inequalities, developing businesses and small businesses. I think all of those are quite key in terms of shaping foreign policy, as well as our broader human rights kind of agenda within an Africa-centric framework. I think that would remain. And what we would see is some nuance. Some of the parties, particularly the DA, which is generally kind of pro-West, generally in outlook, in culture, in worldview, they would, in their own way, bring their own foreign policy preferences into the GNU as cabinet and the committees begin to make policy. So it would continue as usual, but one can say it would be diluted, like any policy, especially in economic policy, in social policy, education policy. This is going to be a very difficult GNU to manage. And you must remember in the first GNU in 1996, that lasted just over a year because the political philosophy of the two parties were vastly different. So it's still early days, but one can say on foreign relations, a lot of the participation in all the platforms South Africa is involved in would continue as usual.
And I think the focus for the longest time it has, or at least it has felt like there's been a tug of war when it comes to South Africa on where we tend to lean and how we choose our allies. Traditionally, South Africa, was seen to be friends with the EU, the UK, and the US. And then came, President Jacob Zuma, where he, unequivocally started, aggressively leaning more to, the East. That's when we saw South Africa joining BRICS. What can be the scenario, the case going forward on this? We saw recently that our relationship with the US has gone a bit sour because of our various stance, particularly with the ICJ case, against Israel, and also again with Russia, and how we treated the issue there. Now you have the DA, as you mentioned, they are very west centric in their thinking and where they want South Africa to be leaning more in. Do we see this tug of war continue even further, and how will it ultimately affect this GNU, because it's a very, very sensitive issue, how a country chooses its allies, and how it benefits from them?
Yes, good question. The best way to approach it is that foreign policy is very dynamic. 2024 is the bonanza year for elections. We've already had over 20 elections. Whether you look at South Africa, India, Mexico, you name it, Russia, all have had elections with a mixed bag of results. But more significantly, as mentioned, let us look at the three major blocks, particularly regarding trade and investment. The EU has just gone into the June elections, and the outcomes were quite a decisive shift to the right. And that means the rise of nationalist parties in broader Europe, Germany, France, etc., signifies that the EU is moving more towards what is called fortress Europe, meaning that the three major platforms and policy changes, and that will have major implications for the developing South and Africa in particular, would be anti-immigration. So all these parties are going to strengthen their borders, and they're going to develop policies to prevent inward migration. That may have lots of dynamics as South Africa develops its relations with the EU. You also have the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, which is seen as a trade barrier. There's a lot of trade barriers in agriculture. So when we engage the EU, it's going to be one of, if South Africa puts its national interest on the table, the EU is becoming increasingly more challenging to trade with, as well as at cultural level with right-wing parties. So I don't see the DA having a lot of moral authority on that if they want to push for South Africa to be closer to the EU, when a lot of its policies goes against the grain of our own human rights values as well as our economic interests. So that's the first part. The second part is BRICS will continue, and it's growing. You have BRICS Plus, which comprises of many new nations in North Africa, in the Middle East, and they are powerhouses in terms of energy and development finance. And South Africa needs all of those to continue its pathway to inclusive growth, as well as diversifying its impact on the world stage. I don't foresee any major challenges or disputes on that. In fact, as you saw with the BRICS summit last year, once the BRICS countries in China got involved in assisting energy action plan, so a result with the separations, the NDB, we managed to address load shedding. So that's a big plus or boost for South Africa. So these are two platforms, I think, at this point in time, where we can show that national interest, economic development would underpin South Africa's foreign policy, as well as our traditional kind of human rights framework in terms of which we seek to engage the world.
I think one of the top issues, I think on the agenda for South Africans particularly is going to be the issue of Palestine, and that watershed case that we presented at the ICJ. I was in Cape Town for the first sitting of Parliament, and I got an opportunity to ask Fikile Mbalula a question about that, and he said our stance on Palestine is not changing. Our foreign policy regarding Palestine won't change. The ICJ case will continue as is. But with the DA in the mix right now, they're very, very, unequivocal when it comes to how, we should be approaching the issue of Palestine and the ICJ case itself. How do we see this one panning out? A very, very important one, and a one that, a lot of South Africans will be keeping a close eye on.
Yes, I think Palestine in South Africa's case at the ICJ was a high point in terms of global international relations. It was a milestone in basically international human rights law, and it significantly shifted the narrative, meaning that it got the support of most of the global South, including EU states like Norway, Ireland, and Spain on its side. That's quite significant. So Palestine and Gaza and the genocide would continue to reshape global world order. As you can see, what the case signifies fundamentally, and why it's referred to as a milestone in international relations, is because this has shown up the kind of double standards of the West, particularly the US and Europe, in international relations. That means the kind of principle or foundation of human rights is an international relations instrument that has now been eroded. That means gone are the days where the US especially and European core nations like Germany, UK, etc. Gone are the days where they can bargain human rights for all kinds of trade agreements, for instance. So human rights has been sacrificed at the Gaza case with the Gaza genocide, and we've seen the responses of Western countries on the South African case. I don't think it will change. Even the DA, basically, their position is nuanced, meaning that they did say that they would respect the outcomes of the ICJ. I think the problem would be the PA, Patriotic Alliance, who are known to be quite opportunistic and kind of pro-Israel, purely because of financial donations. It would be interesting to see, but I think the likes of the PA would generally be reduced to that of a noisemaker or disruptor. But remember, they're an important bloc because they got harnessed a lot of votes. It's all interesting. I would imagine that the foreign policy will work within the national interest framework policy that DIRCO has passed. It would continue, but there would be nuance. I see lots of focus on Africa. I think it's very important that South Africa re-engages with Africa. We've sort of lost the ball. There are many conflicts in Africa. That is most worrying. Let me start off with the following. On our doorstep is Swaziland, which is a draconian authoritarian state and which has major human rights violations. It was quite ironic that King Mswati has been invited as a VIP guest. It doesn't look too good for our human rights record, for instance. But nonetheless, we need to play a big role in Africa. South Africa is hosting the G20 summit next year, and we are taking the baton for Brazil. The president of Brazil has played a very positive role. He has shown significant leadership in terms of marshalling the G20 on a very strong global, multilateral, inclusive agenda, reforming global trade, broadening development finance, as well as addressing global hunger. So President Lula is a gold standard in terms of a leader that's looking at the development agenda. I think South Africa would do well to follow his lead and take forward the agenda for Africa. The big agenda for Africa at the G20 this year and next year would be addressing the debt crisis. 14 African nations are in debt. About 70% of African countries, the highest item on the national budget is interest on debt, and that includes South Africa. So we have a debt crisis, and if we do not address the debt crisis, we cannot marshal resources for development and to meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I would say South Africa is in a unique position to set a development agenda for the G20 and in platforms such as BRICS and IPSA and other formations.
I want us to take a quick break, but when we come back, I think you touched a bit on Africa. I want us to start on SADC itself. Our immediate bloc. For the longest time, I think the ANC government has been accused of protecting SADC leaders who are essentially guilty of various human rights violations and in the various countries. I mean, if you can just look at what's been happening in Zimbabwe, for instance, for the longest time, we know that the ANC and the ruling party ZANU-PF, very, very close ties there. You mentioned also Swaziland, what's currently happening there in their bloc. Mozambique also, there's a lot of conflicts going on in that area, and South Africa being essentially a powerhouse of the bloc, not being as forthcoming as it would be expected. So after the break, we can maybe focus on our primary block, SADC, before we can branch out, to the rest of the continent, and how we play a role in that regard.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
You South African, of course. You anxious about the future. We've got you covered. Build on your wealth portfolio with Randry Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange. Visit us at 151 Stephen Dlamini Road, Musgrave, Durban, or call us on 031-202-4700 for more information. Randry Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange, your passport to gold investment.
Send food and send kindness to those who have lost their homes and have been plunged into poverty. For those who are a meal away from starvation, a food parcel means an entire family can eat this Ramadan. That's the power of food. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
Yasin Badat Financial Advisory. Are your financial goals feeling out of reach? Yasin Badat Financial Advisory is here to turn your aspirations into achievements. Our dedicated team, armed with a history of success, is ready to guide you through the complex nature of financial and investment planning. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to the game, our personalized solutions cater to your unique goals and risk appetite. Trust in our commitment to transparency, integrity, and excellence. Ready to unlock a world of financial freedom? Partner with us today. Call Yasin Badat Financial Advisory at +27 33346 2071 or visit www.yasinbadat.com. Yasin Badat Financial Advisory, guiding you to financial success.
Our brothers and sisters in Palestine are enduring unimaginable hardships. Ashraf aid teams are on the ground, delivering crucial aid to those in need. But we can't do it alone. Palestine is suffering and they need your help. Your support can make a world of difference. Visit www.ashrafulaid.org today and donate to bring hope, relief, and healing to those who are in need.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities, conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Ah, the kitchen, the heart of the home, where memories are made and celebrated. Our go-to place for those freshly stacked pancakes early in the morning or for that late-night snack munchies. We are in there together, cooking, eating, and celebrating life together. Let's keep the kitchen a place that is shared by everyone, where we build stronger bonds and grow together. Sunfoil, Now We Cooking. Visit nowwecooking.co.za for recipes that everyone can help make.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Welcome back to Salam Media. The time is 8:38, and we're still speaking to Research Associate at IGD, Ashraf Patel, and we're chatting about the impact of the new GNU on South Africa's international relations and development cooperation. We already touched on a few topics that included that watershed case at the ICJ, BRICS, EU, and where South Africa could potentially be leaning. And right now we're focusing on Africa, SADC, to be particular. Ashraf, thank you so much for staying on the line. Before we went to the break, I want to touch a bit on SADC. South Africa, a powerhouse in the region, but for the longest of time, the ANC-led government, not being as forthcoming and as aggressive, in managing, a lot of, internal issues within the SADC countries. You can focus on Zimbabwe, for instance, and ZANU-PF, and a host of human rights violations, that have been documented in that area. That ultimately see a lot of Zimbabweans crossing the border and coming, down south to South Africa and creating, a whole other issue, within South Africa itself. People are saying, they're taking jobs, they're doing this, they're doing that. And a lot of people saying these are the failures of the ANC itself, and not being, as forthcoming and as heavy-handed on, the governing party, the ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, which they enjoy very, very close ties with. Well, the ANC is no longer the majority government. How do you see South Africa approaching, the various issues in the immediate SADC region, particularly focusing on Zimbabwe?
Yes, very good. Very good question. Essentially, we are located in Southern Africa. Our collective destinies in the region are intertwined. So Southern Africa still remains the core platform for government, for liberation movements. There are generally good fraternal relations with all the liberation movements in Southern Africa. If we go country by country, of course, Zimbabwe is complicated for very important reasons, mainly being uncontrolled immigration. And that's a result of the collapse of the economy. But the reasons of the collapse of the economy is multifold. So it's not just the fault of government. Yes, there are human rights violations, but I think one of the other drivers is sanctions. The sanctions that the Zimbabwean government endures is now unsustainable and it's unethical, and that is driving the immigration crisis. That's driving lack of economic activity that's needed in Zimbabwe so that jobs and opportunities can be created there. So the kind of US EU imposition of sanctions is backfiring. It's not working at all. So that would be one area that we need to address. The other, of course, is the climate change and the climate emergency, as well as the drought. And that is quite a major humanitarian disaster. I think that is one area that we have very little control of, but it does need a regional kind of approach to resolving the climate emergency and humanitarian situation in Zimbabwe. The other challenge is Lesotho. Lesotho, also one of the poorest countries. We have what is called the Southern African Customs Union. That is a kind of very interesting economic arrangement of trade and tariffs. South Africa does, in a way, subsidize the BLS countries, Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland. That's one area that may need a review. I'm not sure how long-term thinking or strategic thinking is taking place there around those relations. Then the other complicated case is Mozambique, precisely because of the kind of low-intensity warfare in northern Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado. What now is the return of the resource curse. Once you discover oil and gas, it creates much more conflict and underdevelopment and the rise of different extremisms, as we've seen in Mozambique. Now, that would be a major challenge for South Africa. How do we intervene? Currently, the intervention of troops, is that sustainable or not? I don't think it's sustainable. Do we see a new kind of intervention, maybe a peace process? That would be more sustainable. Should South Africa host multiple dialogues in SADC, i.e. Zimbabwe, Swaziland, and Lesotho? That would be a good way of approaching these very complicated and very complex kind of trade, but most importantly, political crisis that these countries face. I think it's quite significant, very significant, that the on our doorstep we're having authoritarian regime like Swaziland that continues to exist, and the leadership of Swaziland continues to have access to South African financial systems, and many of them use South Africa for holidays, and yet their populations are starving, absolutely starving. So these are the contradictions that the South African foreign policy needs to take head on as we approach SADC.
No, definitely. And I think, at the heart of everything that we've been discussing so far is, the foreign ministry. And, there are talks that, Naledi Pandor might not be coming back into that ministry. And there are concerns on, who can fill those big shoes that she has left. Is there anyone in mind, that would be, the next in line to take over that very, very important ministry, and one that was headed very, very, very well by Minister Naledi Pandor, or will be found wanting after, such a big personality and such a, an intellectual powerhouse who was able to maneuver a lot of different, discourse all across the globe, whether it be in Africa, the Middle East, the way she dealt with the America issue. Are we able to find a replacement for her? Is it possible? Do we have anyone in mind in the books that could ultimately take over?
There's no doubt Minister Pandor is a powerhouse in terms of diplomacy, in terms of cabinet, in terms of just her ethical way in which she engages her career, the world, cabinet, politics. I think she's a really good role model for politicians everywhere, speaking her mind, sticking to the values of liberation as well as human rights, as well as trying to balance a very complex world order. It will be difficult to replace her. Of course, it does seem that cabinet is looking at new generation leadership. Whether some of the old guard would stay, that would be an interesting case. But I think we do have emerging leadership. Deputy Minister Alvin Boertes is quite good. He's up to the task. He's been in that position for 5 years. He's developed also good capabilities. There are other leadership within the ANC that could fill international relations. I think ANC would retain international relations if there is an agreement. It's quite a strategic posting, as well as the Ministry of Finance and Trade and Industry and Justice. I think these are very core portfolios that the ANC would definitely want to hold on to, or get their leadership to be in charge. But it all depends on the nature of the GNU agreements. It's not out in the public domain. So it's still too early to tell, but I would think so by the end of this week, Friday, Saturday, you would be able to get the president making his cabinet announcements. Hopefully by Friday, and that would give us the uncertainty in how the government is going forward. But it is also quite a wake-up call for the ANC and the alliance partners. I think the big news is less about MK, more about the shortcomings and divisions within the ANC, or let's call it the majority. If you put the majority together, ANC, MK, EFF, they easily what is called historical ANC, and they have 65% of the vote. But due to divisions, they now basically the ANC has to be in a very compromising, weak position in government. And it's a lesson for liberation movements. Yes.
And just lastly, before I let you go, in your view, what will be the most significant challenge for this new government in balancing domestic priorities with international relations, their own, different ideologies and approach, and the next 5 years, they could be very, very interesting for South Africa. What would be the key to make sure that the next 5 years are very, very successful?
A very good question. I mean, it's quite clear. Addressing the big economic development issues, particularly the development of jobs, the job crisis, skills development. Those are the two big ones, as well as kickstarting small and medium enterprises, which is the engine room for development. We need new generation, small and medium enterprises that can take on new technologies, that can scale, that can go global, take advantage of the BRICS formations, take advantage in the EU, take advantage in AGOA, etc. That would be a big shift going forward, reforming the education system, as well as ensuring good governance, administration. Those are all important foundations for any successful state. It's going to be a very difficult ride ahead in terms of negotiation, because these parties are philosophically very, very different. And policy agenda flows from philosophy, not the other way around. So if you have a vast philosophical gulf, how then you develop effective policies? I think, in my view, if I were to be bold, I don't think the government of national unity would last for more than a year. It may be an interesting ride, but I think the contradictions are too deep, and the broader population would not be able to tolerate a government that's not functional. That may be a pessimistic view, but it's quite probable that the GNU won't go beyond a year. I mean, that's my prediction, but let's see what happens.
All right, we'll definitely be holding you to that. I think that's a very, very interesting analysis that you're making, and I'm sure a lot of South Africans will be keeping a keen eye on that. But we're going to leave it here. Ashraf, thank you so much for giving us your time. Really, really appreciate your in-depth analysis, and I think it was a very, very enjoyable conversation. There you have it there, Ashraf Patel, Research Associate, Institute
Thank you for the
Global
opportunity.
Dialogue. Thank you so much. We're going to leave it there. Well, he's saying this GNU won't probably make it to the end of the year. And I think a lot of analysts and researchers are echoing his sentiments. So it's going to be interesting going forward. What could be some of the key issues that might see the collapse of this GNU. But already we can tell there are cracks. I'm sure if you heard and been watching the news, Helen Ziller, just coming out strongly about their position on various issues, and just just how much power and influence they have on this GNU, and how essentially they won't be giving the ANC any kind of leeway to do as they please. Yeah, I think this is true. There might be a collapse of the GNU, but I think that, I'm a bit optimistic. I don't know why. I think, it might work out. I think maybe it's the South African in me, the patriot in me, that likes to see, coalitions and engagements like this ultimately bearing fruit for South Africans at large, because I don't think we can afford a government collapse, and a reshuffling of cabinet and recalling of ministers and impeachments of presidents. The country can't afford that anymore. We need a stable government that's going to be working for the people of South Africa for the next coming 5 years, that's going to, deploy all of the mechanisms that were put in place, by previous administrations that actually worked. And I think, yeah, man, I hope it doesn't collapse. I hope it doesn't collapse. I hope that, the various, analysts are proven wrong, and that, this government of national unity does indeed take shape and reflect the GNU of 1994. But a lot of people being really pessimistic and saying, well, this thing won't even last a year. Really, really interesting times ahead. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be now shifting the focus to Palestine. We'll be speaking to Professor Jeff Halper, and we'll be speaking about Netanyahu and him dissolving his war cabinet. His decision follows resignation of centrist Gantz and will disappoint headliners aiming to expand influence on war in Gaza. So we'll be speaking to the Professor Jeff Halper about what this essentially means going forward. Jeff Halper is from the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, and he's based out in the US. We'll be taking a quick break, and I will be chatting to him after this.